Hello, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of Audio Signals Podcast. This is where we talk about stories, storytelling, and storytellers. And I like to start with my, at this point, signature phrase, which is, we are all made of stories. And I love it. I've done a lot of branding and marketing and advertising. I like to write. And I think that's how we live in our society. We learn and we need good stories. We need to get inspired, and the stories can be a book, can be a movie, can be music, can be a painting, a photography, whatever. So today we have a storyteller. I'm just going to give you this. I'm going to just qualify you as a storyteller from what I've learned from your bio, Lee. And you do podcasting, you write, you've been a producer, and I'm sure you have other adventures and ventures going on. So without further ado, I'm going to let you say hello and tell me a little bit about yourself and to the audience mostly.
Awesome. Well, thanks. Thanks for having me on the show. And
of course.
Hi, everybody. I'm Lee Schneider. I think this whole journey started when I was about 18 or 19, when I really thought about I wanted to write novels, and it was a kind of a crazy idea because the only novelists I knew were famous novelists, and we had a big library at home, and I would pick out a book, and when I ran out of books in my parents' library, they gave me a account at the local bookstore, and I think when I was around 12, I spent $1,000 in one summer just reading as many books as I could possibly read, mostly novels. And then I had to make a living. So I wrote some novels. I wrote a few. I have a few. Everyone has a few in the drawer, right? I have a few novels in the drawer. But I went into television writing to have a career, to raise a family, to buy a home. So I worked for Good Morning America and Dateline NBC and ran a production company that did documentaries for Discovery and History and Food Network and many others. And I've done that for a while, and also did podcasting for a while because I love podcasting. I love the simplicity of it. I love just people talking. I think it works really well. But I finally had a chance to start writing novels. And the issue with that is you actually have to write the novel. What's the old expression is, I love being a writer, it's the writing I hate. And for me, right, you're familiar. For me, finding the juice to keep the writing going in a long form, maybe years long job of writing a novel was the hard part. So I finally found a topic that I really wanted to dig into, and I'm actually writing 3 connected novels about this topic, finding a way to talk about climate change and finding a way to create role models for people in a novel to think about climate change.
Yeah. And I definitely like that. And it's funny. I talk a lot with people that are academic, both on this and the other podcasts that I have. And sometimes we end up in the importance of storytelling when you're a scientific educator. And I always bring like Carl Sagan as an example, or many other that are actually really good in fascinating people with stories that inspire. So when I saw what you were presenting, I'm really interested in that because one of the things you mentioned in your bio, I think, is how to stay optimistic in your question, and thing you'd like to talk about, how to stay optimistic when we talk about that, which is definitely a question that I will ask you. But the first one is what I mentioned before we start recording. It's like the catch of the sentence that you resist, which is the title of one of your book, is a science fiction set in the near future for people who don't usually read science fiction. And I need you to explain that.
Cool. The idea there is a lot of science fiction and beloved science fiction gets into a very technical stuff. Some science fiction is written by actual scientists, and they it's called hard science fiction, and you don't have to know about orbital escape velocities and things like that, but it helps. I decided to write books where the technology was never explained. Different from a fantasy where magic technology is never explained. But I figure we get in our car, we turn it on. If it's electric, it goes. I don't know how that car goes. I don't know how it works. I just, charge it at the charger, or when I run it on gas, I go gas it up. I don't know what happens, really. I kind of do, but I don't. And I thought, well, what if we looked at a world of 2050 or 2052 or 2053 where things were commonplace, like anti-gravity or high-speed trains that floated, or climate controls that were planetary, that worked all over the place. And what if I didn't have to explain that? It was just more about how the people would deal with it, which is really why we read books anyway, and why we go to movies anyway. We don't, I mean, when you see a Mission Impossible movie, you kind of want to know what the gimmick is, and you kind of want to know, like, oh, how did they get that to do that, that flamethrower thing to work? But not really. I mean, we're more concerned, will Keanu Reeves make it? Will Tom Cruise make it? Will there be a love interest? Or, they can't kill off the main character, can they? And all of those sort of dramatic moments but they're more human. And I was thinking, well, how can I do that? How can I talk about a world that is weird enough to remind us of this world in a turn 90 degrees, just a little different? So there are talking AIs, there are people whose consciousness live in boxes, there are planetary controls that people are trying to control people's minds, and all things that, the way I write it, I try to make it connect to what's happening now. So people will say, he's talking about planetary mind control, but we sort of have that with the internet and the media. In a way, maybe not as extreme as what I'm writing about, but that's the point. Because if I make it a bit of extreme, then it stands out and you can see it. So that's what I mean by writing science fiction for people who don't usually read science fiction. It's a little more in the fantasy realm, and there's this growing world of what's called climate fiction, which I'm kind of, I guess, raising my hand and saying I'm kind of getting into that.
Okay. No, I like that, and I get the picture, and I completely agree with you when it comes to the regular person that go and watch a movie. Just you dive in, right? You're not questioning. Or other book. I mean, you don't read Harry Potter and question how magician became magician and other people are not, right? You just go into it.
Right.
You don't need to explain something about dragons or anything like that. But of course, there's the other way around where you kind of predict the future by knowing enough of hard science fiction, and it's a great point. Now, I like your idea because I will be doing the same thing. I love enchanted and magical story where I just go in another world. It doesn't need to make sense. I just need to like it. So I like that. Another thing that kind of got me was the two title. I didn't read the book. We just connected, and eventually I will get there. But so one is Surrender, and the other one is Resist, which is, are we going to surrender or are we going to resist?
Right.
What's the catch there? What is the catch?
I started thinking about, well, okay, most science fiction now is more than one book. So that immediately set me back. Like, what kind of mind map could I make that would give me 3 stages, really, of the character development? What was going to happen to the people in those books that could mirror what we were feeling as we read them? So surrender is kind of an inside joke, is I actually hate to surrender. I hate giving up. I do yoga, and sometimes the yoga teachers will say things like, just surrender. And I go, insert expletive here. I am not surrendering. But so I decided to name the book that to kind of challenge myself. And what it is it's a directive from a global corporation telling the citizens what they should be doing. And of course, there's a few who say no, more than a few. And those people become the resistance. So the first book covers this world. You have to do a lot of world building in a book. And to take the example of the Harry Potter novels, it is magic and it's fanciful, but it has so much integrity. There's so much detail there that you're willing to believe. You're willing to set aside any doubt and go, I'm in. I'm, like you said, right? I'm in. I'm going to do this. So the first book is about the process that people are asked to surrender to a higher AI corporation, and some say no. And the middle book, Resist, is about what do they do to resist, and what is it like to resist, and how well do they do that, and will they fail or succeed? And the third book, which I'm writing now, is called Liberation, which is about overcoming all of that and getting into something else. So the one-word titles, you could books are funny, right? You could have long, complicated titles, you could have secondary titles, and I played with all of that. But I just thought that the single word would work best for these books.
Yeah. It's interesting titles, and me coming from advertising, always try to get the catchy thing. There was a book that I read, 15 years ago, and it's about the tournament, the World Championship of Memory. Right, there is the people that actually memorize from cards to list of things, and they're extremely good. And the whole story is about this journalist that goes to cover this, and then he's been invited to learn how to do this and go back and compete. And he's like, I don't even remember where I put my keys. It's like, yeah, you can learn. So he goes all through all this trick, and things that are memorable. They're usually because you're curious about something. So he titled the book Moonwalking with Einstein, which has nothing to do with what it's about. But that's why at that time I grabbed that book and I read it. And then he explained why he made it so weird like that. So I mean, you invest a lot into a title because, sometimes that's no more than that makes people get something until be known.
Yeah, and you're going to live with that for a long time. It's going to be on the cover of the book. It's going to be in the Library of Congress. Norman Mailer wrote a book called Why Are We in Vietnam? And the purpose of the book was to ask the question. He knew he was famous at the time, and the war was going on, and he knew that book cover would be all over the place asking that question. And I thought, in a surge of imitative behavior, not that well thought through, I named one of my early novels, My Name is John Coltrane, because I loved the music of John Coltrane, a jazz artist from the late 50s, 60s. And I thought, well, that would be cool to have a book out there that says that would intrigue people. So it's an approach. I mean, I like the idea of it, but so much today in book marketing, gets very dialed in very fast. And you're going to get a publicist who's saying, do you want to change that title? And I didn't really want to deal with that at all.
Well, things have definitely changed. As a job, I talk to a lot of these people, and I'm interested in the authors, and a lot of them they say it's not like they used to be. Like music, it's not like it used to be with social media. You need to have your own audience. You need to do your own marketing. You need to do a lot of podcasts eventually, or whatever you can put your hands on, or do like book signing. Like you said, you don't have that editor that does a lot of things for you before you actually go out there. So I don't know if you feel the same when it comes to marketing the books.
Sure. Well, for some people it's very hard. They kind of freak out. And my attitude has become, I like talking about what I do. That's how I frame it. I want people to read the book, but I'm not trying to sell anything really. I'm talking about what I do, which is fun for me. Yeah. I will say, major caveat, that writing a synopsis or writing the back cover of the book is the hardest thing I've ever done. After you've written a whole book and then try to dial it down to 20 words or a log line, it's horrible. So what I decided to do with book 3 is I wrote that first. I decided to write, I may not stick with it, it may not stay, but at least it gave me a direction and I kind of got it over with. It's also terribly tempting to ask a chatbot to tune up your prose, to write a terrible synopsis of your own book and feed it through and say, punch this up. And it's kind of like having a bad intern punch up your prose, but it also unblocks you, because you look at it, as I have done, and say, boy, that is the worst synopsis ever. Let me fix that. And then it at least inspires you to do a little better.
Yeah. It's like when you pick a title, do you pick it before or after? Like, does it come by itself, and then maybe you get to the end of the book or even a short story or an article? I mean, even if you write an article, it's like, do I write the title before and I follow it as a guideline, or do I wait and see?
Yeah, exactly.
Nowadays you can ask ChatGPT if it actually answers well sometimes, but most of the time I feel like it doesn't. But
I mean, I need a framework, so I'll often start with the title, and I'll often, the characters will start to talk to me. It sounds weird, but I'll start to diary in their voices, and people will raise their hands as characters and say, I want a bigger role, or can you put me in this scene? It's kind of like directing a movie where all the actors want more screen time. And I'm open to listening to that. I'll hear them. If anyone ever looked in my diaries, they think I was crazy, because there's all these different voices and people talking in them, and I don't label them. It just says it's just first person. But you have to get into them somehow and let them kind of talk back. So that's my way.
So I'm going to ask you a question that I love when I see people doing something, but then, as I often say, we have different lives. When you reach a certain age, at least I look back and I'm like, okay, I've done many things. Mm-hmm. But I feel like if you're lucky, you still stay in that kind of frame, like the creative world or the production world, the entertainment world, even if you wear different hats. From what I can see from the short bio I see of you, I mean, yes, you had the idea to write the book. Then you said, well, maybe I don't make a living with that. I'm going to go do other things. But they were still, it seems to me, in the creative realm. And was that by accident, or it's something that you felt like you drove that for you, for yourself?
That's a good question. I think it's inborn. I think you kind of start that way, continue that way, and end that way. I will look, to give 2 examples, speaking of diaries, I'll look in my old notebooks at the things that I've highlighted from 10 years ago, and they're the same things I'm highlighting now, decades later. The same things are knocking around in my head in different forms, but in hindsight, you can recognize them. Right. There was also a period when I got very busy in production, where I just couldn't get up at 5 o'clock in the morning before work to try to write a few pages of the book I was working on, or the screenplay. I was writing screenplays. I was doing creative work and I was writing scripts, but let's say just novels or just literature. And I had to stop. I was seeing a therapist at the time, and she said, you just have to stop writing. That kind of thing, just do your work and try to get more sleep and live. And it was among the worst advice that I've ever had, because I got more depressed and just in a worse mood because I didn't have that creative outlet that I determined. It's different. You can do creative work at work. It's great. I do it and you do it. But what about that crazy idea you have to write a short story or whatever it is, or sing a song? If you have to suppress that because you can't get to it, or you don't have the time, or you don't have a cooperative family because the people who support you around this have to believe in you, and if they don't, it's very hard to fight them, it's going to be unhappy. So I found that it kind of manifests, it kind of shows up, and if you try to stop it, it's going to be bad. You're going to be unhappy.
Yeah, I agree. And another thing is, by doing what you like, also some people say write about what you know. So for example, one of my last episode I recorded is a neurosurgeon that decided then to write a book where he described what neurosurgeons do, but there's also ghost stories, like he sees ghosts, somebody that work in really heavy environment, like emergency room accident, and anyway he built this thing, and it made me think, like, they say write about what you know, but I think you need to write about what you care too. It may not be what you know, because you may have choose a different path. Now, have you always been passionate about the future of this planet? And some people right now, it's like, this guy is, of course, they're in California, Santa Monica, LA. Of course, they think that way. Right?
but it kind of hit me. It's not true. I was concerned. I bought when the Iraq War started by Bush. I went out. I had a small inheritance from my grandmother, and I went out and bought a little Honda Prius because it could go. It could be a hybrid car. So I've had the conviction of it for a long time, but it didn't really. And I'll say, when I worked for NBC in Burbank, there were days where you couldn't go outside, or you didn't want to go outside because the pollution was too bad. So I had an experience. But recently here, and by recently, I mean probably 2018, 2019, we had some fires up north and some here. And the air, you couldn't go outside. I'm a runner as well, couldn't really run. And it started to hit me. Things are really changing. Like, something's happening here. That California is not going to be the land of eternal sunshine and, fun all the time, like a Beach Boys song. Something's happening. And that's really what got me going on to this path and caused me to, it's one thing to start a novel, but actually finish 2 novels and write a third, because I'm on a path here that I see these stories are really worth telling, and I think they're going to matter to people. So writing what you care. Write what you know is a funny thing, because what is the definition of know? I mean, do people know about hobbits? Have you met one? If maybe, maybe.
That's the other fun part.
Yeah.
When you have no boundaries and you want to create an entire world, just go for it. That's what Tolkien did.
Right. That I think, yes, no. I mean, if you're going to try to write a story about something that you've never, ever experienced, it's going to be a bit dicey. But when you look at Ursula Le Guin or any of the great science fiction writers, she's been in Arctic places and cold places, but I don't think she's ever been to any of those planets that she writes so convincingly about with such detail. So that's clearly sourcing from another place, an interesting place, a mystical place, but sourcing from another place than what we know.
Right. So when you write these books, do you feel like is the story that drives you, or what you want to communicate that drives you? I don't know if it makes sense as a question.
Yeah, that makes sense. You got to be careful about getting preachy, and what do I want to communicate? There's some writers who definitely see the book as a medium to get their ideas across. Asimov is a good example. The writing is not always super terrific, but the ideas are absolutely amazing. And that's what he was doing. That's hard because your ideas have to be pretty darn good to carry that. I think it's more story. I mean, we're narrative animals. People love story. People are story, right? To coin a phrase. And we have to experience these narratives and get into people and get into role modeling people. I mean, who hasn't watched some superhero movie or some and pretended to be that superhero in their mind for a minute? Well, that's the story working. We want to be able to enter these stories and these realities. So I think it's story. It just has to be. When I have a scene mapped out, and I map out pretty well, I do mind maps, I do graphs, I do charts, I do people. But sometimes, you get those people in the room and it's like actors improving a scene. Like, sometimes things happen and somebody says something and I'll think, well, that's pretty crazy, but let's run with that. And the whole scene changes. And sometimes I'll have to cut that part out because it's too crazy. But other times it becomes like the best part or something that I have to back engineer to build in to make it make sense. And that's happened a couple of times. The first book, a character falls in love with an AI. Now, that's been covered before, so I didn't think of it, but I thought, well, how are we going to deal with these AI personalities, a personality-based AI? What if an AI were our boss? Like, how would you deal with that person? Or what if you had an AI of a loved one who had passed away, and how, not the mechanics, I don't care about that. I care about the person. And that just channeled in. Like, that was a scene I was writing, and suddenly there they were. The actors in the scene were kind of writing it themselves, and I said, wow, I didn't think of that, but forget the outline. Let's write that. And that can work really well.
Yeah. So you go with the flow of where the story is bringing you. As we get towards the end here, and I could talk about this a lot, but I'm kind of curious also about what you do with the podcast. I know you have one that's called the FutureX podcast. And are you focused there on the environment and the climate change as well, or more generic future?
Yeah, of course I changed the title because why not? It's my podcast. I can change the title. I think you've done that at some point.
Yeah.
So it's called the Future Lab now, and it's going to start recording next month. And yes, I'm going to be aiming at climate fiction. What is it? Who's writing it? Why write it? The reason to write it? And I'm going to dial that in and just think about how it can amplify and build the community around that kind of science fiction. It's kind of a branch of science fiction.
Very cool. I like that. So the last part of the interview, normally I'll ask what's next, but you kind of already told me there is a third book. And there sounds to me like a podcast that kind of goes along with that. And I'm going to ask you then, your vision when you write this, it's a way to reflect. I think writing it's a way to help you think. It's like if sometimes I have a conversation like right now, I don't remember everything we said, but when I go and either re-listen or do the transcript, because maybe generative AI helps me with that, but I reread it, I'm like, oh, okay, yeah, we covered all this, and this, and I'm like, that gives me an idea. Maybe I can write a newsletter about it, because there is something that. So as you write this, as you have more conversation on the podcast, are you being optimistic about where we're going? Are you hopeless? And is it changing as you reflect more about it?
Definitely changing. There are things about what's going on that do give cause for optimism. I think that, first of all, it's in the mind. It's in the collective consciousness. People are taking the issue more seriously. And there are more people, especially in Europe, not so much here, but thinking about, well, how do we electrify cars? How do we have fewer cars? And people are giving a lot of good thought to that, and how do we build cities, or how do we modify the cities we have so we're better partners with the planet? The problem with humans, there are many, but one big one is we haven't been really great partners with other species. We've basically gone in there and leveled the place, or taken over, or, to coin a phrase, put up a parking lot. And that's got to end. The planet is not going to put up with it any longer. And we're going to find that we need to cooperate with other species. We need to connect with our environment in a way that's not so destructive, even though it might feel good, and even though it's kind of macho, and driving really fast in a car might be fun, but it feels like the consciousness out there, the way people are thinking, is changing. And of course, that has to come first, right? Before there's a electric car with a super long range, or before there's a really walkable city, or any of that, people have to start thinking differently about it. And I think they are. So that's the reason for the optimism.
I agree with you. I mean, unfortunately, we are made in a way that we always have to, if you can tell somebody, don't touch that candle, the flame, because you're going to burn yourself. And you need to touch it so that you can prove it. But as human, we could just project, and some do. But I feel like we're at a point that actually it has become, unfortunately, very tangible. All of this. I mean, we see it outside, but there's been people that has been telling us this since the 50s. So
that's right.
And I think the importance of telling the right stories and use fiction to actually talk about reality. I think is a beautiful thing.
Yeah,
I love it.
Cool.
I love it. So I really enjoyed our conversation. I'm definitely going to check your podcast as well. Are you going to start it soon? The new the lab?
It'll start. We're recording starting next month, and you know what it's like. I hope maybe in September we'll get the episodes out there. I'm debating. The usual podcasters debate whether I put them out as I record them, or bank a bunch and put them out at a regular cadence.
I like to put them up when I record it, if I have time. But that's me. I'll just record more. I don't care. But please, when you do that, let me know. I'm gonna have you on my other show, Redefining Society, where we talk about technology and society, and that would be a cool conversation. I really enjoy these, and I wish we had more time. But I told myself more than 35 minutes, people are just not gonna listen. So
pretty true.
I like to drive there unless it's a panel or something with 4 or 5 people on the show. Yeah. So thank you very much, Lee.
You're welcome.
And there'll be, of course, you know it, and the audience know it. There'll be notes, and there'll be links to your website, to your Amazon, and anything you want to share with me, where they can buy the book. And for everybody else, just subscribe, stay tuned. There are more stories coming from Audio Signals, as we are all made of stories, and I love to talk. I'm Italian. What can I do? Thank you very much, everybody. Thank you, Lee.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure.